Hi everyone, and welcome to our Spotlight on Series number 4, Student Support. I'm Sharon Waitzer, ASQA's Director of Engagement and Education Quality. I'd also like to welcome our speakers and panellists, Courtney Smith, the Assistant Director, Engagement and Education Quality, James Gett, Assistant Director, Engagement and Education Regulatory Best Practice, and Sarah O'Regan from Evolve College. As I noted, today is our 4th webinar for the Spotlight On series. We're focusing on ensuring students are supported pre and during enrolment. Today's session will run for approximately 60 minutes. In terms of audio, we have muted you all. Also, we are using live captioning to access the service, go to the GoToWebinar question page and click on the link there. Today's session will be recorded so you can share with your colleagues or view at a later date. It will be available on our website within a couple of days. On a final note, we do not issue certificates of attendance this webinar. Before starting the session, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land on which we meet today. I would like to pay my respects to the people, the cultures, and the elders, past, present, and emerging. I'm presenting from Sydney, which is Gadigal land. Gadigal people form part of the Eora Nation. What we'll cover today will be, Courtney will provide us a brief overview of the Spotlight series today and today's topic as well, ensuring our students are being supported pre and during enrolment. This will be followed by a panel discussion. I've got to thank all the participants that have pre-submitted questions for our panel. However, you haven't missed out. There's still an opportunity to submit questions during the webinar. I will provide you with the Slido QR code on the next slide. This is your opportunity to ask either ASQA or the VET representative questions. As mentioned, we'll be using Slido for the questions to the panel. I will now hand over to Courtney Smith, our Assistant Director of Engagement and Education.
Hi everyone, good to see you all. Well, not really, I can't see you, but I'm assuming you're here. As noted, my name is Courtney Smith. I'm the Assistant Director of the Engagement and Education Quality team. And I'm here to talk you through the Spotlight side of this webinar, but also just to host the question and answer section. So, moving on. So first of all, we're going to give a brief recap of Spotlight On. I'm really aware on how well this program's been received, and I on behalf of ASQA are really grateful for all the great feedback and engagement that we've had on the program. But for anyone who is new for the first time, I'm just going to give you a brief recap, which is that the Spotlight series was launched in early 2021 as an online learning-based resource for providers. What we're trying to do with Spotlight is to make a series that responds to our regulatory risk priorities. In this particular case, student support is one of our regulated risk areas of concern, so we've raised that through Spotlight. We like to support training providers in key areas of identified risks. The series also intended to help you learn to self-assure and continuously improve your practices as we're moving, as you will be aware, to a more self-assurance-based regulated system. We try and keep each series to around 5 to 6 weeks, and we conclude each one with a webinar such as this, with an interactive Q&A, which allows you to ask some of the questions that may have come up for you during the Spotlight series. So what we're trying to do is really just help you develop best practice and career-changing VETCAT outcomes for your students. Spotlight 1 was on trainers and assessors. Spotlight 2 was on assessment validation, and Series 3 was on assessment. Each chapter covers a different aspect in the series. We really like to use lots of videos and resources. We're trying to make this a really sort of friendly user experience for people. So we're trying to take what we think is reasonably complex information and make it into a situation where it's hopefully both entertaining and valuable for you. At any point, you can go back and look at our previous Spotlight series or previous chapters just by looking. You can either type Spotlight, by looking at our website. You can type Spotlight into our search bar, or you can find us under our new Guidance and Resources tab. For those of you who haven't noticed yet, the ASQA website was recently refreshed and is looking very nice. So here's what we're here for today, which is a series on Spotlight on Series 4, which is focusing on student support. As we know, as I'm sure you do, every experience, student support is, of course, a very broad subject. There are many different variables. So what we've done with this series is tried to target to the areas that have come up as areas of concern in ASQA's regulatory activities, but also through the queries we receive from you as providers. It's also been written with the intention of reminding why effective student support strategies are when they're in place, can be really valuable to you as a provider. They ensure good results for your students, but then also to you as a provider. They help enhance your experience with employers because they know they're getting great graduates. Series 4, Chapter 1 was really an overview of this situation. Chapter 2, that was basically on making your strategies more effective by doing questionnaires or speaking to your students prior to enrolment, so you can really work out what individual student needs you will find through the process. And that can help you work out your training and assessment strategies, working on things like reasonable adjustments, talking to industry as well about what are reasonable adjustments in the course that we're doing, but also ensuring that the students who you enrol are a match to what you're offering. Chapter 3 was about, once a student is enrolled, how you monitor and deliver those student support services, helping them progress through their course. These could be the courses that you've already identified through the process of the enrolment, such as maintaining language literacy, numeracy, or digital literacy, or they could be in response to issues that come up for a student during their enrolment, such as, unfortunately, a traumatic event or something similar. Chapter 4 discusses support for online students. As we'd all be very aware, COVID created a lot of challenges for our sector, and one of those challenges was a significant change to online delivery for courses. What we've learned through our strategic review, also feedback from providers and feedback from students, is that online students do tend to require more support as top of what's offered from face-to-face students, as they can often feel more isolated in terms of both location, but also in terms of their connection to your college. Chapter 5 focused on student support for overseas students. For those of you who are also CRICAS providers, you'd be aware that the National Code has extra requirements for students, which is based on the fact that these students are adjusting to life in Australia, as well as being a student. So they have additional welfare needs and also require targeted support options. This chapter was providing guidance on those additional requirements, but also considering it as part of best practice for people who are working in domestic situations. I am now very pleased to introduce our panel with James Gett and Sarah O'Regan, who will just help us discuss the coordination and implementation of student support services and answer your questions live during this webinar. Firstly, I'd like to welcome James Gett, ASQA's Assistant Director of Education and Engagement, Regulatory Best Practice. James has 13 years of experience in the vet sector and is highly experienced in vet and quality regulatory compliance. His roles in the vet sector have spanned multiple functions, including being a literacy and numeracy tutor to a lecturer, compliance manager and compliance consultant from RTOs such as niche providers through to TAFE. His roles in ASQA have included working on a number of complex projects and provided solutions to long-standing issues such as key reforms to our assessment methodology and developing operating models for our compliance and our internal review functions. Welcome, James.
Hi, everyone.
I'd also like to welcome our representative, Sarah O'Regan from Evolve College. Evolve College is a privately operated national RTO headquartered in Victoria. They're known well for their ability to support students and especially work really well in an online environment. Theron's the Executive Manager for Governance and General Counsel. She's also a member of our Stakeholder Liaison Group, is a frequent speaker at national and international education conferences, and mentors and guidance providers on how to operate at the highest possible level. She has more than 25 years experience in business and law across several heavily regulated industries, and this includes healthcare, insurance, energy, and vocational education. Sarah, thank you so much for bringing your expertise with us today.
Thanks, Courtney, and hi, everyone.
Now, as we move on to the questions, just a reminder again that this is how you can ask us questions for the series. You can either use the QR code as this thing. You can go to slido.com and enter the event code, which is 0877099, or you can also access through the GoToWebinar chat box, which has been put up by our team. Technical questions can be answered through the GoToWebinar. So before we commence as noted by Sharon earlier, we do receive a significant number of questions in these Spotlight series. We often receive well over 100, so we are usually unable to answer every query. Well, we've always been unfortunately unable to answer every query, but that doesn't mean that we don't listen to your queries and we don't note them. You can either come to us back after the session to get more information, or note that we do use them for further education. So, for example, questions that you've asked us really did inform this series. We really do take what we learn from you. But also, when asking your questions, please note, and we're all aware that student support is a very huge topic, and there are so many numerous scenarios that could occur that if you have a very specific individual question, please leave that to answering that via one of our other channels, such as our inquiries line. What we really want to do here is discuss what we can to support as many people watching this as possible, because as I said, there are so many student support questions we could have. So again, please let us know if you do want an individual response by emailing inquiries line. We will now get on to the questions and answers. Thank you to everyone who's already submitted questions. I can see them all coming in and it's really fantastic. So our very first question will be, do all students need to complete LLN and PTR, or are there exemptions there? James, would you like to answer that from your perspective?
Yeah, I'd love to. So as far as, so are there any exemptions is a difficult question to answer. So I think a really good way to kind of look at this one is to kind of like go back to, it's actually kind of go back to the base area. So when you are looking at the LLN assessments and the PTRs that you are looking to do for your students, you really need to go back and look to clauses 1.1 and 5.1. So when we're talking about that, so when you're developing up your training and assessment strategy, when you're doing that, you're looking at your training package requirements, and you're also looking at your student cohort, and you're doing an analysis of those two items so that you get a really good understanding of the kind of the support mechanisms that you need to put into place, and you need to be considering reasonable adjustments at those stages. And so when you're understanding your student cohort, you're understanding the potential limitations that that cohort might have. And so once you've considered the training package requirements and the student cohort likely requirements, and you've developed up your support mechanisms, that also really gives you a good understanding of the kind of limitations that your support systems may have. So you won't be able to provide support to every student in every single circumstance, and having an understanding of that will allow you to develop up a good assessment system, or a good system to assess students as to whether they are suitable to enter into your course. And so I guess so that was a very long way of getting to the point of saying essentially you need to be able to provide students with information about whether the course is suitable for them. And so, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought there a little bit, but you do need to be able to provide that student with information. And so how you get that information, whether it is through an LLN assessment or through a PTR, you do need to gain that information so that you can provide them with information about whether the course is suitable so that they can make their own informed decision. Courtney, do you think we need to add anything more to that one? Or?
I think from our perspective, that's an excellent answer. Sarah, as the provider, can you just talk through the benefits of working through the LLN process as part of the enrolment?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Courtney, and thank you, James, for that really helpful answer. I'm sure that's helping a lot of providers out there. What I would add to what James said is that as a provider, we also need to make sure that we're satisfied that the person who is enrolling, sorry, my phone keeps going off and I keep telling it to be quiet. We need to make sure that the person who is enrolling is actually going to meet the requirements of the training packaging and is actually able to undertake the course. So as well as making sure that the student has all the information up front, that is super important. They need to know what they're getting into and what the enrolment process involves. But equally so, as a provider, we need to know that they are actually going to be able to complete the course, which includes having adequate or sufficient English or language and numeracy skills that is going to mean that completing the course is not going to be a problem for them. So we need to look out for that as well. It doesn't mean that an LLN test has to be taken, but it is certainly one way of ascertaining that as a provider. But we use that where relevant, and we also have other mechanisms in place, such as an interview process where we personally speak with students who are enrolling. That gives us a very clear indication of their English skills. We can also test basic numeracy skills and that kind of thing as well. So we've got processes in place as part of the enrolment process where we are satisfied by the end of it that the student's really going to be able to do the course, and the LLN fits into that.
That's fantastic, thank you. And it actually ties very nicely into the next question that we've got, which is that can a provider stipulate that they can't provide support to a student? And I'm taking this in the terms of can you say that an enrolment, you can't enrol a student? And I think it sort of ties on from what you've just sort of mentioned, Saren.
Yeah, do you want me to go first on that one?
Yeah, sorry.
Absolutely. So that is actually an excellent question because it is something that comes up. So it's a little bit of a dichotomy. So providers have to obviously comply with the standards, and part of the standards includes the relevant legislation as well that is outside the operation of an RTO, strictly speaking, but applies to anything where you're providing a service really, a commercial service. So as a provider, you need to be very careful or very, very aware of what that legislation is. So on the one hand, you're balancing making sure your students are informed, as we talked about in the last question, also making sure that it's a fit for the student to do this particular course, that they're fully informed about what that involves, that you've got equitable practices, you're fair and equitable in terms of the way that you bring people in. But on the other side of that as well, there is a range of things that you do need to be aware of, which would include things like human rights, discrimination, making sure you don't offend any of that. So although as a provider, you may actually have the best intention of the student in mind, if you actually flatly tell the student that it's not appropriate for them to do, or you can't provide the service because of X, Y, and Z, you actually could be breaching discrimination requirements under legislation, and it could potentially be a human rights issue, and you could have one of the commissioners giving you a call. Of course, that's not something that you want to end up in the position of. So just bear in mind that you need to balance all of that out. Sometimes you may find, we've certainly found this, where you have someone who comes along, they really want to complete the course, but you're not sure if they're actually going to be able to. And that's legitimate. So if that's the case, then what we have found the best way to go about this is to actually discuss it with the student. If it's a child, then bring their parent along or a guardian. If they have some sort of impairment, there might be some support person that they have that you can bring along and actually talk through the requirements of the course. So in the end, you're not actually telling them, no, sorry, you can't do it, because that actually could be discrimination. But you discuss with them, this is what the course requires, this is what the training package requires. We have scope for reasonable adjustment, but we can't actually then compromise on the rigor of the assessment process, which has to actually meet the training package requirements and, of course, the standards. But if you make sure that they're very well informed about what it is that they are going to be required to do, and say to them, you know, we want to make sure this is going to work for you, and we want to discuss the way in which it can work for you, and these are the requirements on us as a provider, then they're fully informed, but they're also not being told that they can't do it. And if it is that they can't do it, it can be that they actually come to that conclusion themselves with your support. So this is another way in which a provider can actually provide support to a potential student as well as an actual student that's on the books. So just be careful of that one, because it is a bit of a tricky area, but I hope that gives you some things to consider.
That was a fantastic answer. I think it was really detailed and really helpful because it put it in a real sort of sensible practice rather than just being a yes or no answer, which a lot of this isn't. James, did you have anything to add? I think from our perspective that the standards don't have any rules. So, well, they have rules, but not related specifically to this.
Yeah, Saren, thank you. That was a fantastic answer. And I'd pretty much just reiterate a lot of what Saren has just said. So when there is potential issues in relation to student capabilities or capabilities or skills and existing knowledge, it is really important to understand the limitations that your RTO has in being able to deliver education. And so when you are looking at it, you are understanding what reasonable adjustments your organisation is able to provide and being able to communicate that very clearly to your students. So what we'd be looking for in relation to the standards is that you have undertaken that analysis of your training package, of your student cohort. You've developed up a system where you can understand whether the student possesses the necessary skills and has the abilities to enter into that course, but also to understand where their abilities sit in relation to the limitations of the training that you're able to provide. And so once you've done that, if there are issues, having that conversation, like Saren is saying, where you are saying that these are the limitations of our organisation. Yes, we are able to enrol you and provide you with support services to get you through. But in the instance that you aren't able to provide them with the support necessary to assist them to complete the training product, then having that very honest conversation with the student is quite often one of the best ways to go, and it's what we see in best practice. But as Saren said, you do need to be very careful in relation with that conversation, because you need to be taking into consideration the Disability Discrimination Act. And I would point people towards Disability Standards for Education. I think it's 2005. That's an excellent resource, and there's, I believe, some fact sheets in that area which really do give you a very good understanding of the reasons for which you can essentially, I'm trying to pick my right word here, but where you can essentially deny enrolment is the words.
One thing I just would back onto that as well is something that's useful is part of we've mentioned it, touched on it briefly, is that industry engagement. It's talking to your industry about when reasonable adjustment is appropriate, and also really having that background and that could help you also work out what you can prepare and what you are able to reasonably adjust, and where you feel comfortable that you can access the right supports if needed. All right, now this is a good question for Saren, because this is about, after we've said what a good College Evolve is when it comes to online students, what sort of supports do you find work well for online students?
Fantastic, Courtney. I know you preempted that before in the intro. You said we were going to focus on that, but it's so important. So we've been delivering online for a very long time through a predecessor RTO and now through Evolve. But online students really do need more support. I mean, if you just always, with the practices of a RTO or a provider, the best way of going about it is to put yourself in the shoes of the student and what is it actually like for them. So there's so much I can say about this. Gosh, where do I begin? So first of all, with an online student, just bear in mind, I know it's really obvious, but we do need to remember it and make it front of our mind in everything that we do with online students. And that's that they don't have that face-to-face contact that the people who are coming on campus have. And you may underplay that and think, oh, well, it doesn't really matter. You know, they'll be fine. They just work their way through the system and it's all going to be okay. But it actually means a lot to them to have that personal contact. So having processes and systems in place where you can manage that, even if you've got a lot of students, you can automate things so that presumably, depending on what system you use, we designed and built our own, but I think you can probably get that these days. But having some sort of automation where, for instance, it's clocking when students are logging in, so actually entry into the system, as well as activity within the system. So are they actually submitting things? How long has it been since they submitted something? Is there a gap between them logging in? That sort of thing. And where It's not too much, but there's starting to be a little bit of a pattern of them not engaging with the course. Automated notification goes out and just touches base. It's not a robotic type message, but something that you as an RTO have carefully constructed, which really is a friendly touch base. Hey, just reaching out to you, just making sure everything's okay. How are you going with your study? We haven't noticed you online for a while. Very friendly, very supportive. And then that can slightly escalate if that behavior continues. And then if it continues beyond something that you would consider to be just a sort of a one-off or a reasonable time away, that your staff then focus on those students and make sure that they're in touch with them so that they can actually call and email, just that personal contact that says, hey, we're here. How's it going? Are you having any difficulties? Is there anything you'd like to discuss? So the way that your online system is structured should be considered by you as a provider to be part of the way that you are supporting students. So that means that it needs to be clear as to what's expected of them. It needs to be engaging so that they are actually feeling it's not just some dry robotic thing or here's a PDF, just read through reams and reams of pages and we hope you do really well in your assessment, but we're not really here for you as people. They actually need to feel like they're engaging with the course and that you are there every step of the way. So make it interactive. Putting an investment from you as an RTO into the quality of your online system, whatever it is that you choose to use, is very important because students do actually feel supported by that. And if that's clear, they're also going to have less questions because it's clear what's expected of them and it's an enjoyable process for them to work through it. And then again, your staff can focus on supporting students who really need it. But in general answer to what you've asked there, Courtney, which I think is just, as I said, so important, just be there for online students and know that you need to put that little bit extra in when it comes to them, because even though some of them in particular are incredibly capable, and these days online really is accepted as being just standard practice, everything is being digitized. So where you have
and of course the irony of online as the system breaks.
Should I jump in while Sarah's frozen? Yeah, so look, I mean, so in relation to online learning, when you look at the standards, when you're looking at 1.7, delivering online doesn't absolve you of the responsibility to provide student support. It is still one of the requirements to provide student support where necessary. And so, yeah, so in that way, and there's, and like as Sarah has kind of discussed, there is a lot of option out there. There's another number of mechanisms available for the delivery of for student support in an online environment. And I'd point people towards Chapter 4 of this Spotlight On series, and also the ASQA Strategic Review of Online Learning, which can be found on ASQA's website. And I believe there's also a link in the Spotlight On series to that information.
There is. Thank you very much. Now, from your perspective as someone especially who used to be involved as a trainer in this situation, what are your tips or your thoughts about helping students like basically improve their literacy and their numeracy?
Yeah, so I'll speak about this as previous experience in this area rather than as a ASQA person, because I don't want it to be taken anything I say as advice in this area, but
this is RTO
personal
hat.
Experience. Yep, RTO hat. But there are so many ways to improve a student's digital literacy. There's so many accredited pathways, unaccredited pathways, which are really suitable. There's accredited pathways in the ICT training package, where there is some really good introductory digital literacy units of competency. Outside of the accredited, unaccredited, I would really highly recommend, there are a number of experts in the LLM world who can provide really good advice in relation to how to improve a student's digital literacy. I'd recommend reaching out to an organisation if you are struggling in this area, such as the Australian Council for Adult Literacy, ACAL, and also their state affiliates, so the state level councils of adult literacy as well, because they would be able to provide you with point you towards some excellent resources and assist you in that way. And in the instance that they aren't able to provide something, I would highly recommend reaching out and speaking with an LLN and digital expert, because they'll be able to provide you with some really good advice in those areas. And it's going to definitely be customized based upon the student cohort and also the training package that they're looking to enter into.
Excellent. Now, we're getting a run of questions regarding such as how can you determine LLN from processes outside of, for example, IELTS tests, or can you work it out from previous having certificates and diplomas? Can you work it out from doing the fact that they're already employed in the industry? Now, from the perspective of at least the National Code, we can talk about it in the sense that you're asked to confirm that you have a documented policy and procedure for accessing whether the overseas student's English language proficiency is appropriate. The National Code does not spell out that you need to have an IELTS test. What the National, so there's a course similar with the standards. So to let you know, you can come up with other processes to determine that the student does have a language, is of an appropriate language skill. But you're going to need to really make sure that what you're doing is documented, you feel confident in it, and you can sort of, in a sense, prove your confidence in it. You're aware, for example, of, as we've discussed previously, industry requirements in the area. So, for example, some qualifications such as nursing often have specific IELTS results. How can you guarantee that the student has that if you're not doing an IELTS? How can you feel assured that your process basically is rigorous enough in a sense? It certainly can be. There are certainly people that do LLN without needing to have certain tests. As Sarah said earlier, you don't need to actually always do an LLN test if you have other processes. But what you really want to do is just make sure that what you've got is documented, that you feel confident with it. You've spoken to the right experts. You've spoken to industry. You've spoken to people in the LLN field. And so you feel that you can guarantee that the student that you are enrolling in that course does have the LLN and as necessarily digital literacy to complete that course. James, is there anything you'd like to add to that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just jump in, and just in relation to, whether a Cert 4 or a high level qualification is sufficient. Once again, I'd have to steer people back towards what is the training product that you're actually enrolling a student in. If you are, for example, enrolling a student in bricklaying and they have a bachelor's degree in economics, while the bachelor's degree of economics does tell you a lot about the student's capability, there are so many other considerations that should be taken into account, including physical capabilities. If there's a high degree of numeracy involved in the qualification that you intend to deliver, was the qualification that they had previously, did they have a high level of numeracy? So, and also digital skills. Potentially, if a qualification is quite superseded and they haven't undertaken study for a long time, there's no guarantee that a high-level qualification will mean that they have the digital literacy skills suitable for entering into an online delivery kind of course. So you really need to, when you are considering how you're going to assess your students to see whether they have the sufficient knowledge and skills and abilities to enter into your course, you really need to be looking at the training package that you're intending to deliver and assess and coming up with a system which ensures that the students have those skills to enter that course. And just because they have a high level qualification doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have all the skills and knowledge that are required.
Well, great, and welcome back, Sarah, and it's good to see you. I love computers. We're just having a quick discussion on basically talking about LLN and different tests, etc., that you can do. As we mentioned earlier, you don't always have to do an LLN test. We've talked about you might have previous qualifications. Again, the relevance of those qualifications might think you might be employed. Do you have any tips that you would suggest for a provider regarding how to best measure LLN that we haven't already touched on?
Yeah, so if you want to use a test, then picking the appropriate one is great. And obviously, if you're a CRICOS provider, you've got a selection of things that you can use, and you've got to fit within the requirements of the National Code. But in addition to that, and even if you're not a CRICOS provider, if you're a vet provider nationally, then what you need to make sure of is that your internal processes are also checking yourself that what the student is presenting with is going to actually be appropriate for completing the course. I mean, the last thing you want is for a student to be enrolled and then they actually can't do it. They can't do it because they don't have the language skills, and then that's embarrassing for them, awkward for them, and really as a provider you should have picked that up beforehand. So what you can find is that people can go through a test and they can actually pass it, but there can actually still be problems in this area. So I mentioned in an earlier answer that we use an internal process which includes an interview. And then if the interview is very generic, it's very general, just describes the course to the student. If any LLN issues are identified in that, we'll do a follow-up conversation by a trainer and assessor who specialises in this area. And they do a more thorough check. So is the student really capable? Because there's it's not just nothing that we ever do as a provider. This is for all of us as providers, should ever just be a tick box. So we're not just doing a test because that's what the standards require or that's what the national code requires. We actually also want to satisfy ourselves that the student really is ready and prepared and able to do the course. So having that internal mechanism will help with that. We found that to be very important.
That's great. Thank you. Now, I'm just going to, for people who have been playing along at home, what I've been doing is taking the most popular thing. As you can see, you can vote questions up on Slido, but I'm just going to skip to what's the latest question because it actually flows very nicely from what we've just been talking about, which is there are times when a student, despite what you've put in place, can't do it. You've given them support, you've given them as many options as you can. Sometimes you've identified it early, you've discussed it, you've given support, but it just doesn't happen. The question is, what if they can't gain competence? And I think from the perspective of us as the regulator, in the sense, there's nothing in the standards that says that everyone has to complete that. So that you don't always have to successfully complete a course. So from your perspective as a provider, Seren, what's your feelings when you are, or if you've been in a situation similar or you're aware of situations where it's been, how do you best respond to when a student isn't going to get it as such?
Yeah, that's fantastic. And these questions are great because they really are what can come up. So being prepared for that is really important as part of a provider's work. So having that communication channel open from the beginning where the student knows that it's all about you as a provider supporting them is very important. So if difficulties arise, then they're dealt with in the same manner or the same context. So the student knows that they can talk with you and you're not just, you as a staff or like you as an RTO are not actually just going to slam them and kick them out. You are genuinely there to support them. If that does get to the point where you've tried reasonable adjustment, you've done all sorts of things, making learning materials available in different formats or one-on-one mentoring by trainer and assessor, support staff calls just to mentor them along. Often it is actually a lot to do with confidence and just feeling that you have their back and that they can rely on that and that they're not on their own. That in itself can help tremendously. But if a student is looking like they can't actually do it, then it's time to have a conversation with them. Sometimes you may be offering a course that has a lower qualification equivalent within the same discipline. So for instance, if you're offering a diploma and there's a certificate 4 course that's available, it may be an appropriate discussion to have with them that they could potentially graduate on the certificate 4 if that's about the level that they're achieving, and then see how they go with the diploma. Sometimes we found a natural attrition from that sort of availability, and sometimes people just insist on going on, and we're very upfront with them and discuss what that actually means. One thing to bear in mind though as well is if you are a VSL provider and they are a VSL student, you can't go backwards. Well, you've got to be careful going forwards or backwards in terms of Cert 4 to diploma or the other way around. You have to be careful because the VSL office wants to make sure that if you give them a loan towards a diploma, but the intention was always that they were just going to get a certificate for, then it's basically ripping off the Commonwealth. So you wouldn't want to get involved in anything like that. So do be careful of that, which is a fair enough consideration. But if you have to have that discussion with the student about difficulties that they're having, then get in early and discuss it with them openly, not actually, as I said before in a previous answer, in no way slamming them or writing them off, but it has to start with, we want to support you, we've noticed you're having difficulty, you're not passing, your whatever's going on, like be specific, but from the angle of we want to support you and we are here to support you. Then if it has to progress to, listen, we don't want you to be struggling, and what are you feeling is needed in this situation, it becomes easier to transition that into a conversation about, well, perhaps this isn't working, and is there another way of studying or another course perhaps that we're offering that might be more suitable. But it's never a dismissal, so to speak, because you have to remember again that you're dealing with the student as a person, and how they feel supported by you is actually everything, and is going to be the way in which they stay and enjoy the course, or the way in which they leave. So managing that relationship is a very important part of support, and open communication and honest communication and prompt communication are all very important.
That's great, thank you. I think from the regulator perspective, one thing that we advise almost at all situations is document. So it's from the perspective of us, we are, as the actual Spotlight series mentions, that things don't always work out. Situations happen, and sometimes students have to withdraw, sometimes students leave. But as Sarah said, there's so many things that you can do leading up to those points. Document them, show that the efforts that you've made, show that this for reasons of compliance, but also reasons of next time, if there's something similar was to happen, you've got experience of what you've done and you know what works for you and how it works. So the importance of documentation is always really key in these situations. Was there anything you wanted to add, James, or are you happy to move on?
Actually, would you mind if I just, there's a couple of things, because if that was something that we did identify at audit, so when we were conducting an audit, we identified that a student had, when we were looking at assessment records, a student attempted multiple times and hadn't been able to progress through the course. Some of the questions that we might ask are, we'd be looking at the student support and saying, okay, so this student failed on multiple occasions. What was the reason for it? Is it a reason because something as circumstances occurred during delivery, which has stopped the student from being able to progress, or was it something that should have been identified earlier on at enrolment? So when you were having those, so if it is something that should have been identified, such as language literacy, numeracy, and digital skills prior to enrolment, and that a conversation should have occurred with the student at that point, we'd be looking at those records and saying, okay, so was your assessment system for the student early on, was it able to identify it? If it didn't identify it, what happened there? And then that would lead on to the question of, all right, so if there was an issue here, what have you done in part of your continuous improvement to make sure that you have fixed that gap so that it doesn't happen again, and so that future students will be protected from going down a similar pathway?
Excellent. And how dare you answer questions at this webinar in which you're supposed to answer questions, James? All right, now moving on to the next question, I'll just deal with this quickly. It's I received the majority of my enrolments from education agents. Are they expected to conduct the enrolment suitability interviews, or is the RTO? This is very much, the National Code again doesn't have any specific requirements on this, but what it does require is that you have specific, again, policies and procedures in place on how you determine whether a student is suitable. And if you are going to pass that off to your education agents to do, make sure it's in your written agreement with the education agents. Make sure that what you've got is very clear to an education agent on what the standards that you require are and how they can best test against that. And then what the information they give back to you matches basically what students you get. As part of your monitoring process, as part of your engagement process with your education agent and your students, really make sure that basically those messages are getting across and that you feel these students are good matches. So yes, you can have education agents do it according to the National Code. However, you want to be really careful and really assure that you've got those processes very laid out, very clearly documented. Again, good old word documentation. So yeah, moving on away from the National Code again, because it's always fun. But what are the best ways to provide orientation to new students, both online and on campus? Not just basics such as where bathrooms are and things like that, but things like academic orientation such as referencing. What tools have you got in place when a new student starts, Saren?
Well, what I could do with that question, this is a really good one, is actually go back again to super practical ways in which we do that. So, for instance, we consider the enrolment process to actually be part of the student's preparation to undertake the course. So I mentioned before that we undertake an interview process. That interview is a discussion that goes for however long it needs to be, usually about 20 minutes, can be longer, can be 30, and where the staff actually go through what the course entails. So the student is aware of what is actually going to happen in the course when they enroll. And part of that is getting a feel for the type of work they'll be doing, where they'll be doing it in the classroom or online, how that works, what it looks like, type of questions they'll be answering, and the type of learning they'll undertake. So they really do get a feel for how that's going to work for them. And equally so, the staff member, it sounds like a really friendly call, but the staff member is actually assessing their academic suitability at the same time, because the way that they then respond to those descriptions, or, you know, the way they engage in a chat with the staff member tells a lot about how they're actually coping, or how they're going to cope or otherwise with the content of the course in the manner in which it's rolled out. So I would emphasize that the enrolment process should be seen as a very important part of that, of preparing the student. So, for instance, our staff will mention things like the amount of time that they should be spending, say, per day or per week, not as a dictation, but as an indication that they're going to be moving through the requirements of the course, and always an encouragement to call us or email us or contact their trainer and assessor with any questions that they may have, or any time they need support at all. So it's built in from the beginning where they are really prepared. And what we find is that the students then, when they enroll, they already know what it's going to be like, because they've had a thorough conversation, and they can have as many of them as they like before their enrolment is actually confirmed and activated. And they come in and they're actually ready. It sounds simple again, but it makes a big difference, and they really are ready when they start to engage with us formally as a student.
James, I guess perhaps less from a regulatory perspective, but from your own experience back in training organisations too, do you have anything that you'd like to add about orientating, starting a new student?
Yeah, no, I probably won't. I won't jump in on that one. I think Saren's provided a wonderful answer. Thank you very much, though.
Now, Saren, this is probably another question that's mostly for you. In that, the question is about how are support staff define local support services. So I guess from your experience from running a training organisation, how do your teams identify support service, agencies, people to go speak to? What's the process that you've put in place in regarding, basically, if someone comes to you with an issue, or maintaining relationships that you've already had?
Okay, so are you talking more there about a referral type thing where we wouldn't actually be providing the support ourselves? Is that the question?
Yes. Yeah, sorry. So it's about, like, for example, if you've got situations where someone has a mental health issue or a physical health issue and they need support outside of what you can give, how do you find that, or for example, with an online student, they might need someone a bit more local. Have you got a process in place?
Yeah, that's great. So we just have, again, a really open, friendly chat with the students so that they know from the beginning that we are there to support them. What we find is that the caliber of the relationship that we set up from the beginning with the student means that they know that they can just come to us they're not going to be judged. They are actually going to be supported with whatever may arise for them. And things do come up. The study can be demanding. And so, and often is very demanding. Like there's a lot that's required of them, and that's under the training package, and they have to deal with that. But then other things in their life can arise at the same time. So if something like a physical health issue or a mental health issue arises, then it's really great to be aware of the types of support that are available out there in the community. So just thinking of some things offhand that we would use there, you can, for instance, if there's a mental health issue, the APA, so that's Australian Psychologists Association, I'm pretty sure they've got a helpline that you can refer them to. And also, of course, everybody seems to know Beyond Blue. They've got a number of resources, both on their website as well as a phone line that can be accessed. And then, of course, if it's really serious, so for instance, if we've never experienced this, but I'm not saying that it wouldn't happen, and that's if someone was perhaps, if their life was in danger, perhaps they were having what do they call it, suicide ideation, I think, where they're thinking along those lines. We can't write it off and say that that's never going to happen. If it did happen, then there's an organisation called Lifeline, which has a really good reputation for speaking with people who are essentially in a crisis. So what I would add to that is, and also there's a physical health one, I think it's called Health Direct, where you find the local physical health clinics or surgeries or whatever that are close to you as a student. So that's another one that's useful to send them to. But just making sure that you really are there for the student and that you are suggesting things without going beyond what you as an RTO are actually there to do. So at no time do your staff actually start to act like a professional in a mental health area, even though they may have good ideas about how to support. They're not actually putting themselves across as counsellors, and they're certainly not psychologists, they're not doctors, unless they are, but it would be unusual, I would imagine. But just making sure you don't overstep that mark and just being friendly and very, very supportive, but referring to third-party agencies where that is needed, and just providing links to different organisations and suggesting they have a chat if that is something that they would like to do, and that they can always call you back and talk about how that went for them as well. So you're more of a friendly support as opposed to actually stepping in and playing a professional role that you're actually not, you're not actually qualified to undertake.
Okay. Thank you. And from a perspective of the Beyond Blue, for people who are unaware of it, is a really excellent resource. It's got education resources, but it's also got online forums that people can participate in if they're looking for support. So that might also always be a good place for students to go and start. Now, we're actually up to the last question. I just want to thank everyone as well who's been watching this and be participating in this, because we've had some really excellent questions. As she said, I think we've got some really good engagement, so I'm really thankful to everyone who's contributed. So we'll just go to the very last question. And the last question is a bit of a generic one, but it's in the sense of I'm leaving this to either of you to answer. But in your opinion, what is an excellence benchmark for student support? Is there such a thing?
Sarah, do you want to go? Or do you want... There's so much to say.
All right,
Sarah,
I'll say something and then over to you, James, to add. So I would say that the benchmark for student support is how the student actually feels about it. So getting feedback from your students is critical, and it's not ever something to be scared of or to think, oh no, what if they say something bad? To us, if someone's got feedback, it is valuable no matter what they have to say. And sometimes they might have what seems like a negative thing to say, but all it is an opportunity to actually show them how much you as a provider really do care about them and the extent of support that is there that they may not have realised. So you can turn feedback into an opportunity to demonstrate your commitment to support to students. So encouraging feedback is very, very important. And I'd say then as you get your formal feedback as part of the QI data process and also your informal feedback, we encourage students to talk to trainers and assessors or to ring our student support team at any time, email us, anything they like. They know that we want to hear from them because how they feel about everything, the support they're getting, the course, the way that they're studying, everything about their course and their interaction with us is actually important to us. So we would measure how supported a student is by the way that they tell us that they are responding to that. And also we do survey our graduates after they finish because we want to know, well, how prepared were you to enter industry? We really care about that. And we have strong relationships with employers as well, where we ask them, how are our graduates going? And if there's anything that needs to be changed, not that we get that because we tend to be ahead of the game, but that is through, once again, extreme care in what does industry need, and then we make sure that we meet it. But if they did raise anything with us that we weren't doing, we would absolutely change our course to cater for that, because after all, that's our job, is to supply students who are confident and truly job ready when they leave to go into an employer and say, hey, I'm ready to go, let's work, put me to work, I'm ready to go. And then the employer obviously loves that. So the feedback that you get from both students and employers, I think, is your primary gauge of how supported students are and whether you have the right processes in place to ensure that that occurs or not, and not being afraid to refine. We are constantly refining everything we do. A continuous improvement is just a day-to-day thing for us. And things will come up and we'll say, oh, I didn't think of that. We need to make an adjustment here, and then this then affects that. And let's ask the students how they feel about that. And it's just a constant process of refining. So don't feel that you're making mistakes and that you have to hide anything, or that you shouldn't be undertaking a refining process, or that proves that you've done something wrong. It's actually the opposite. It's a commitment to continuously improving, to provide a level of service to your clients and therefore the public and the employers that employ them at the end of the day that everybody deserves.
That's brilliant. Thank you. We're on 3 o'clock. So James, is there anything you'd like to quickly add, or did Seren just beautifully sum that up for us?
That was fantastic what Seren said. And the only 2 words I'd probably add in is that when we see really high quality student support, it's often when it's proactive, not reactive. It's when people have a really strong understanding of their student cohort, of the training package and what support their students are likely to need. And so that they've thought ahead of it, they've thought of the permutations ahead of time and are able to provide the support when the need for it arises. So definitely proactive and not reactive, and with a lot of continuous improvement built into it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. If we go to the last slide, please. All right, as we said, we've hit the end of the time. I'd like to thank you all for attending today's webinar. I'd like to give a very special thanks to our panelists, James and Seren, who I believe gave some really insightful and really thoughtful opinions on the situations around student support. As we've said, it's a large topic that has a lot of different variables. So I really hope this was a really valuable experience, and I'm really grateful to both Seren and James for their input. At the end of this session, we put up a little survey so you can give us some feedback on how today's session went. We really appreciate your thoughts on this. It's super helpful because it helps us shape the next webinar and the next Spotlight series. If you have any colleagues who weren't able to attend today, this webinar is being recorded, and so we will load a copy to our webpage for those who are unable to attend. And thank you again for watching. If you do have any queries after this Spotlight session, our contact details are up on the slide in front of you. Please shout out if you need. And again, thank you once again. I hope you really found great value in this session. Have a really great rest of your day. Thank you.